Hi, and welcome back to Evita at the Rhythm of My Heart. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to my channel, remember to subscribe, like, and share my videos. Today I've prepared for you a simple step-by-step on how to make one of my favorite breads, pan sobao, or pan de manteca. Pan de manteca or pan sobao looks like this, and it's the type of bread that you find in every bakery in the island of Puerto Rico. So without further ado, let's get started with making this delicious pan sobao. This recipe for pan sobao or Puerto Rican bread is very simple to make, and it requires very little ingredients. We're going to need 4 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to be using unbleached. We're also going to need some yeast, and this is the brand of yeast that I'll be using, but you could use whatever brand you prefer. Just be sure to select the active dry yeast type. And we're going to be using the equivalent of an envelope of dry yeast for this recipe. We're also going to need some salt and some sugar that I've divided into 2 parts, and in a little bit I'll show you the reason why we divide our sugar. And of course, since we're going to be making pan de manteca or pan sobao, traditionally in Puerto Rico they use lard, and we're going to be using 1/4 cup of lard. And this is the type of lard that I'll be using. Of course, if you prefer, you can use Crisco. And of course, the Crisco comes in bars like this or in tubs that you can measure. And finally, we're gonna need 1 cup of lukewarm water that I've divided into 2 parts, 3/4 cup and 1/4 separately. Now, we are going to use the 1/4 cup of lukewarm water. And it's very important that we keep the temperature of our water between 105 to 110 degrees because that's what we're going to use to bloom our yeast. So when we come back, I'm going to show you how simple it is to put together this great and delicious traditional pan sobao from Puerto Rico. First, I want to start by activating our yeast, and to do that we take warm water, and I have 1/4 cup of warm water. This is lukewarm water, which you're looking for a temperature of between 105 to 110 degrees. You don't want your water to be too high or too hot because that will kill your yeast. And now we're going to add to our water, we're going to add some sugar and our yeast. And blooming basically means just activating it. And what that does is 2 things. First, it allows the yeast to begin slowly to activate. But the most important thing that I find that you can achieve by doing that is it's a sure way to find out whether or not your yeast is still active, if it's alive, and if it's gonna help your breads or your cookies or whatever you're making rise. What is going to happen is in anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, because we fed our yeast some sugar, and yeast loves sugar, our yeast is going to begin to grow and bubble. And it's going to either double or triple in size. So when I come back, I'm going to show you what our yeast looks like after 5 to 10 minutes. While the yeast is proofing, and as you can see, after a few minutes, the yeast is almost doubled in size, which is what we're looking for. That's a good indication that our yeast is alive and very active. I took my lard, or if you're going to use shortening, you could do that, and I added it to my hot water to melt. Of course, if your water is not hot enough and it's not melting the lard or the shortening, you can stick this in the microwave and melt it that way also. We're gonna go ahead and mix this together, and we're gonna set it aside while we wait for the yeast to be fully activated, so that I can show you in the next step how we put together this delicious pan sobao from Puerto Rico. I placed my flour in the mixer, and now I'm ready to begin making our bread. And I'm gonna mix our sugar, and this is 4 tablespoons of sugar, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I'm gonna mix this on low for a few seconds just to combine. Once it's all combined, I'm gonna turn it off. And I'm gonna go ahead and add my yeast mixture. And let me just show you very quickly how our yeast has grown. So we know for sure that our yeast is active and alive, which is really good news for me, because that means our bread is gonna rise. I'm gonna go ahead and add it to my flour, and I like to do that without mixing it because I don't want it to fly all over the place. And also, I don't want to, you know, spill any of this great yeast all over the counter. And I'm going to go ahead and begin to mix to combine until it's well incorporated. If you notice that it's not mixing well, you can always help it with a spatula just to combine. And that's good enough right now. Now I'm going to begin adding the water that we have with the melted lard or shortening. And I'm going to do that while mixing on low. And we're going to just keep on pouring the water until we're done. But we want to do this on low because we don't want to get flour all over our face. Okay. There we go. You notice the dough is beginning to come together, and I like to do this on low because I also don't like to overwork my dough. So I'm going to continue doing this until it comes together. I'm going to slowly increase the speed of the mixer just to combine. And I just want to point out that the amount of flour and water that you use for these doughs depends on where you live and the level of humidity in the country or in the state that you live in. So if you notice that your dough is either too dry or too wet, then you add small quantities of either water if it's too dry or flour if it's too wet to your dough, just until it begins to form a dough ball. Now to do that and to be able to control the amount you add, you want to just add small, maybe half a tablespoon or half a teaspoon at a time. And you really just have to play it by ear as you go. And like I said, this is going to depend and vary depending on where you live. So we're going to continue mixing this until our dough begins to form. My dough is coming together, but I noticed that it's still slightly wet. So I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle a small amount of flour to the bowl just to help it come together. Now you know your dough is ready when it begins to roll on your dough hook. So ours is almost there. So I'm going to continue mixing on high until it comes together and begins to roll on the dough hook. Our dough is almost there, so I'm just going to let it go for a few more seconds. It's nicely put together and it's beginning to roll around the hook of the dough, or the dough hook. And we're done. And you know your dough is ready when it begins to wrap around the hook, and also when it pulls away from the hook easily. It's still fairly warm, but it's a nice soft dough. So now what I want to do is I want to remove it from my bowl. But first I want to get, we can leave it here if you like, but I'm going to show you very quickly how we prepare this dough for their first rise. Like I said, we can leave it here or we can place it on a different container. I'm going to be using one of these plates to do that. And I'm going to remove it from the bowl. And without having to, we don't have to knead it any further. So I'm just going to go ahead and form it into a ball. This is nice and soft, as you can see. Still feels fairly warm. And once I've got it into a nice little ball, what I like to do is I like to take some of the shortening or the lard, and I'm going to place a small amount of the shortening on the bottom, like so, just to keep it from sticking. If you like, you can use some Spam and just cooking spray, that will work too. And I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then using the same oil or spray, we go ahead and place a small amount on our dough ball, and we place it on our plate like so. And now I'm going to go ahead and get it ready for its first rise. Over here you have our dough after 1 hour of resting our dough or proofing our dough in the oven. So let me show you very quickly what it looks like. And there you have our bread dough after an hour of proofing or rising in the oven. So we're ready to begin making our loaves of pan sobao. First thing I want to do is I want to lightly flour my surface. And I don't want to add too much flour because although this dough is still fairly wet, it doesn't require the addition of flour. Listen to that. Sounds like little fluffy pillows. Okay, we're going to go ahead and cut it in half. And still moist and soft, but it doesn't stick to your hands or your surface, which is a good indication that we did a very good job with our dough. And now I'm going to be using a rolling pin and begin. First I'm going to just assist it with my hands and begin forming the dough. I'm going to sprinkle just a slight amount of flour. Do the same with my rolling pin. Okay, like so. And I'm going to begin stretching the dough to a rectangular. So we want a rectangle shape for a loaf. Okay, well, I'm gonna turn it to the other side just so that I can get a nice even shape. And I can see it's fairly moist on this side, so I'm gonna go ahead and sprinkle a small amount of flour once again and just go ahead and roll. Okay, now this recipe yields 2 big loaves of bread. And traditionally in Puerto Rico, you know, they make it about this size. It comes either in a 1 pound long loaf or 1 pound 2 loaves, depending on your preference. I do have memories of my childhood, and I can recall as early as 6:30 in the morning, you could visit the bakeries in Puerto Rico, and the smells of the fresh baked bread is just truly amazing. So, you know, that's one of the things I do miss about my island of Puerto Rico. So we're going to begin rolling the bread like this, and once we do the first bit of it, we want to press just to seal the edges, like so, and then we roll it until you get to the other side. It doesn't have to be perfect. And what we do want to do is begin pinching the edges as you go along, and that's just going to secure your loaf in place like so. Then when you get to the ends, you press on it and begin folding, and you pinch just like that. You want to make sure it's nice and sealed, because when it begins to rise the second time, it will open up on you. Let's do the other side. Push it in and begin pressing and pinching. Like so. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now, once you know it's nicely secured, we want to go ahead and turn it on that side. And this is when you decide whether or not you want to make one big loaf or if you want to make 2 loaves out of that. So if you're going to leave it as whole, then you then you just leave it like that. And we're going to place it on a baking sheet that I've lined with one of these handy dandy liners. And you're going to place it either that way because it's going to grow, or this way. And you want to leave some room on both sides because it is going to rise a second time before baking. So this one's ready, and I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. And here we have the 2 loaves of bread ready for their second rise. Before we allow this bread to rise a second time, we want to go ahead and make a couple of cuts on the dough, like so. That's what gives it that beautiful design. If you want, you can skip this. It doesn't really make a world of difference, but I just think that it looks very pretty. And we want to do that. Not too deep. We want to just make cuts just on the surface of the bread. And there you have it. We're going to place it in the oven again with the oven off, just the oven light on, for about an hour to rise the second time. Check it out. The bread's been rising for an hour, and this is what it looks like. And I just want to show you what it looks like on the bottom. This is one of the loaves. But I also want to show you what happens when you don't make sure that you seal the edges on the bottom. If you take a very close look, you can see that upon rising, it's separated slightly. Not a big deal, because when it bakes, that's not going to affect the baking process of the bread. I just wanted to show you that that's the reason why it's so important that, you know, we seal the edges when we form the loaf. Well, our bread is finally out of the oven, and I want to start by just pointing out, first of all, that it's nice and hot still, but I want to point out that in the beginning of this video, I stated that this bread takes between 35 minutes to 45 minutes to bake, and I would like to correct that. The cooking time for this bread ranges between 25 minutes to 35 minutes, depending on your oven and also the size of your loaves. So, you know, just for the record, I want to just point that out. Also, if you like your bread to be a little crustier or crispier, you may leave it a little longer in the oven, but my recommendation will be that you keep an eye on it just in case, because you definitely don't want to burn it. So now, very carefully, because it's still very hot, I'm going to go ahead and lift it and just show you the bottom of the bread. And this is the loaf that I pointed out to you in the beginning that separated, you know, when I pinched it. But as you can see, it did not affect, you know, the way the loaf baked in the oven. It is very pliable. So it's nice and soft, as you can see. It's nice and soft. And that's exactly the texture that I'm looking for. Of course, if you like it crispier, you can go ahead and leave it longer in the oven. So when I come back, it's gonna be time for my favorite part. I'm gonna slice through this loaf of bread and I'm going to taste it. Check it out. It's not that hot, still very soft and spongy, which is the way I like my bread. And now I'm gonna go ahead and slice a little piece of this bread. Knife goes right through it, just like that. And there you go. You can use this bread for sandwiches. You can use it for croutons, with soups. And of course, the best way to eat it is with some butter. And I'm just spreading some unsalted butter on mine. Just like that. And now for my favorite part. I get to try it. It's so good. Like I said, it's spongy and soft, which is the texture that I was aiming for. It reminds me of when I lived in Puerto Rico, and the aromas and the smell of that fresh baked bread. If you like this recipe, please remember to subscribe, like, and share my videos. And until next time, this is Evita at the rhythm of my heart. Buen provecho y hasta la próxima.